Hi, everybody. It's Craig and Richard here, the week 3 feedback video. Good to be with you all, and some very interesting topics this week. I think the cognitive practices, Richard, have been right to the fore, which is great because we get a sense that mindfulness is more than just sitting in a chair practicing meditation. It actually gives us insights into how the mind works. Well, it works well or doesn't work well sometimes. Yeah. So
Yeah.
some of the interesting things like perception and learners relating to making mountains out of molehills. There's one thing there, but we see something different, and how the mind can really distort perception, or things that go bump in the night. It's like, to use a metaphor, the things that sort of happen in the dark with low awareness often create a lot of stress and anxiety.
It's a
I
great
think,
map, really, the cognitive practices, isn't it? Because it really gives you something to look for or to start to notice. And these things, of course, are playing out all the time in our minds.
that's right. And so the awareness, the greater awareness that comes with mindfulness allows us to start to see when we're holding on, or when we're perhaps misperceiving things, or when we're getting reactive to something that we can't change. And so it really allows us the opportunity to step back and have a look and just reconsider the situation,
It's one
which
of
is
my
a very
favorite things about mindfulness, Craig, the ability to start seeing what's sort of happening in the mind. I mean, as a psychologist, I find that fascinating. But as a human being, I find it immensely helpful to be able to notice the mental habits, the
yeah.
ways my mind kind of gets caught in particular kind of contracted ways of thinking or doing things. It's fantastic to be able to see that. I mean, confronting perhaps, but also very empowering to be able to see that and to stop feeding those habits unconsciously.
Yeah. And it's sort of, in a sense, the thinking differently. Well, it really starts with the standing back and looking differently, looking more clearly, looking more objectively, more lucidly, shall we say.
Yes.
Acceptance has been an interesting and important topic that's
Well,
come up this week.
one
And
of the big
where
four,
does
isn't it?
acceptance apathy,
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, isn't it? Because some of the learners sort of say, "Well, hang on a sec. Acceptance, yeah, get it. Stop reacting to things and resisting life. But hang on, what about climate change and biodiversity and human rights? Do we just sort of accept that and allow it to happen?" And it's a very interesting question, and one that comes up a lot, and I think you made a distinction just there between acceptance and apathy, acceptance and resignation. They're really not the same things. I mean, let's look at it. If we take an issue like climate change and we're not accepting it, I'm not going to accept this, I'm going to resist this, I'm going to fight it, I'm going to get out there in the streets. I guess sometimes it feels empowering to us and maybe seems like it's doing a whole lot of good. But is it really? Is it bringing everybody together so that we can all work on this issue together, or is it perhaps polarizing people even further? I mean, I could imagine maybe some people will be watching the news and looking at violent protests about certain things, or people yelling from the rooftops and thinking, "Oh, okay, I'm just going to stay away from that," or "You're wrong," you're caught up in some social media bubble. And this is kind of how it's working. This in-group out-group bias is just moving us further and further apart. And sometimes the more we dig our heels in, the further apart we get, and the further from any real kind of creative solution, which is only something that all of us can do together. I mean, something like climate change and biodiversity, even human rights, we all need to come together in a way. So to accept that that's happening, and from that place of acceptance and recognizing that the inseparability, us and the animals who are their habitats are becoming challenged. I mean, it's not a big leap to see that, hang on, this is our it's our habitat that's under threat here. And so when we start to sense that connection, and there's that sense of deeper connection, it gives us an ability to, I think, solve problems in a much more kind of powerful way than just yelling and making noise about them. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, yeah, I sometimes, when seeing, and we could be marching for peace, but getting incredibly angry. And I think, like the people that have really had a transformative effect on society and on human rights and so
Gandhi
on.
and Martin Luther King and Mandela, people like that, you mean?
Yeah, yeah. Like, and the thing, I think and look, you can't really say for other people because you're not in their head, but what you kind of get a sense of is there's an acceptance that there is an issue. There's an
Mm.
acceptance that things are the way they are. But what incredible power with clarity and inner stillness and calm, and a kind of a very universal view to sort of bring people together and to be a real power force for peace. And I think that can only really come from an inner place of peace. To start from that inner place of peace and clarity. And then if we take action, it can be clearer, more reasonable, and not in that kind of divisive sort of way that sometimes increases conflict rather than increases clarity and helps to resolve conflict. And just the fact that we accept that the climate is changing doesn't mean also that we don't put solar panels on the roof or that we don't invest in sustainable long-term approaches to energy and so on. But it comes from an accepting place that the situation is what it is.
Yeah.
I suppose
and in the end, if we can perhaps do something about that inner division that we get, that might help us to work more skillfully with the outer division that's so obviously happening in the world.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so interesting. I find it so interesting to learn more about the lives and the philosophies and the approaches of people who really have made substantial contributions to justice and to constructive change in society. And it seems that they did the inner work first, and then they acted with much more wisdom and much more unifying effect. So very interesting questions raised. One of the other, and perhaps in a more practical kind, practical, I don't mean practical.
That's more pragmatic, isn't it, I guess?
In a more mundane kind of way, questions around multitasking, productivity, the sort of the efficient attention switching multitasking thing. And I suppose I'd relate to it, say as a doctor, and mind you, I'm not working in emergency situations anymore, but remember when working, and if the attention if very present, then you might be getting a piece of information from somebody, but your attention's like a laser beam. You're listening to what they're saying. Okay. Then you might look at a monitor and see what's happening on the ECG. Okay. And then you might give an instruction, and then you might need to put in an IV line. But the attention's moving like a laser beam, but very agile, but very focused. And it can look like multitasking, but it's not. The attention was on one thing at a time. And that's different to when kind of scrambled, agitated, and somebody's giving you a piece of information at the same moment that you're trying to read the ECG, and you don't hear what's being said properly, and you don't take in what's happening on the monitor properly. That's exactly the time when mistakes are made and so on. So efficient attention switching, it can look like multitasking, but it's not, because the person's internally, I like to use the word micromanaging their attention very efficiently. And that can include sometimes, you're reading the ECG, somebody comes up, I'll be with you in a moment. Finish doing okay, now what did you want to tell me? And the person's
or even just reading the email or reading the paper. Hang on a sec, I'll be with you in a moment.
Right. Press send. Good. Now what did you want to tell me?
Yeah. Excellent. Hey, and the meditation as well, now that it's a 10-minute practice this week, that of course brings things up for people. Some people love that because, often the first 5 minutes of a meditation is just kind of the noise in the mind subsiding a little bit. Some people find it very challenging, sitting for longer periods, which is all just part of it. I mean, if we're sitting and meditating and the mind's wandering, that's totally normal and fine. And it's a good thing that we're noticing that. That's the whole training. So many people get into this. I was running a session yesterday and everyone had this, people, Craig, get that idea that after a while that meditation equals a blank mind or a relaxed body or a calm feeling, because it often happens that way. And then you would get attached to that, like, oh, okay, I'm getting it right when my mind calms down. I'm somehow getting it wrong when it doesn't. And it's so important to go beyond that, right? Because what we're doing is we're just observing the normal habits of the mind, that there's busyness in the mind sometimes and there's quiet in the mind at other times, and it's just what's happening. And it's not that one's good or bad. The ability to be with that and stay present with it without reacting to it. That's really what we're practicing.
Yeah.
So some of the, you jump in.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's like the weather, clear, sunny day, that's beautiful. Well, it is more pleasant in a way, like the clear minds. But another day, it's overcast and dull. Another day, it's all stormy. And the mind's a little bit like that. Like the weather's different every day, but it is just what it is.
Yes.
That accepting, non-judgmental, non-reactive attitude, whatever it is that we observe. But when there are moments of mental clarity or stillness,
Yeah.
then
Just
may
to
well
observe
just
that. I mean, one of our learners really said, for a moment, their mind just blanked out and there was nothing. They were just listening. So they were very present. But for the first time in a very long time, their mind was completely blank. No thoughts, no wandering. Is this normal? Is this good? And, it just is what it is. I mean, it shows us something, I guess, when that busy thinking subsides and we're still present. And in fact, there's a sense of well-being. Perhaps that tells us a little something about how much we should be feeding the default mode narratives and keeping the mind all kind of churned up. But again, it's, sitting with that stillness and sitting with a busy mind, they're both really powerful practices. They're both very important things to do. The important thing is to stay as present as we can and not react to what's happening. And that's when we're practicing mindfulness. And if we start getting too attached to blank states or, relaxed, positive, expansive states of mind, then we're setting up a trap for ourselves, because that's going to change. Everything is always changing. So the moment that changes and the mind gets busy again, we're like, oh my God, I had it, now I've lost it. And,
yes.
So it's so easy to play that game, isn't it? But very important
That's right.
to not do it. Yeah.
Because if we step in with those sorts of assumptions or expectations and so on, then it kind of sets up a duality of judging and criticizing and hoping and, when we observe something different coming up. So if we can free ourselves of that. And I tend not to use the word blank, more sort of clear or lucid, like the clouds have cleared from the skies.
Yeah.
But probably just until that moment when the mind thinks, hey, I'm not having any thoughts.
Yeah.
and then the mind gets down on a whole stream of thinking about, I'm not having any thoughts. This is great. I wonder if this is what I'm meant to be experiencing. And then all of a sudden, we're off on that train of thought.
And it's the days where my mind's running in a million directions at once and is just crazy. They're the days I really feel like I'm practicing mindfulness.
Yeah.
Just to stay present and focused and non-reactive in the midst of that feels to me like a very powerful practice.
Yeah. And you see, because those days, if the mind's very clear and still, it's a little bit like going sailing on a day that's lovely and peaceful and the waves are even. And if we said, well, which day is more pleasant? When the water is like that and the sky is like that, you'd say, oh, that's more pleasant than when it's stormy and lots of waves and everything else. So one's more pleasant than the other. But which one teaches you more about sailing? Rough day. And so, if it's a rough day up there, stormy and whatever, and we're just trying to stay on an even keel and practicing, it may not be as pleasant as the other day, but it's actually the more useful practice in many ways, because they're the days that stand us in good stead when it's all hitting the fan in day-to-day life. But they're the days that'll give us some clarity, some inner stability, some ability to navigate through that. So we can walk in whatever.
Maybe they're both important to remember our love for sailing, but also to learn how to sail on the tough days.
That's right.
Yeah. So next week's our final week.
That's right. So, there's going to be a longer meditation practice, so 20 minutes for those who'd like to jump in and practice for a longer period of time and go a bit deeper into that, work a little bit more with it. And we'll be looking at managing emotions and managing, and let's just take care with what we mean by that, just learning to understand, work with emotions, but that's going to be an important topic. Pretty simple, pretty easy. I think everybody finds that pretty easy. Would that be right, Richard?
Oh, it's super simple, Craig. Just mindfully being with emotions. Basic practice.
Very easy. So we'll be looking at that, and then and look forward to the learners' comments. And please follow Sherelle, and she gives such fantastic support to all the learners along the way.
Yeah.